Okay, part 8 of the muscular system. I think there's 3, maybe 4 more parts to this. So we're just kind of finishing up this. This is the 3rd time. We've covered this. We've covered this. I kind of bunched other stuff besides this because we've already covered what calcium does. So I'm going to go through this pretty quick. EC coupling, once generated, the action potential propagated along the sarcolemma down the T tubules. Periterminal cisternae release calcium. Calcium binds to troponin, moves tropomyosin out of the way. The actin active binding sites are exposed, and so hydrolysis of ATP powers this cycling process in a couple of different ways. One, this calcium has to be actively transported back into the SR. Once it does, troponin goes back to its original conformation. Tropomyosin goes back and blocking those active sites on actin, so the muscle fiber relaxes. I would highly recommend printing this PowerPoint out and just kind of make sure that you can start up here with the action potential. Voltage gated calcium gates open. Calcium rushes in, triggers exocytosis. Acetylcholine diffuses across the synaptic cleft to chemical gates on the motor end plate. Those chemical gates open. Sodium enters, potassium leaves at the same time because of the electrochemical gradients. Triggers depolarization. Voltage gates for sodium open causes depolarization. Voltage gates for potassium open causes repolarization. Depolarization travels along the sarcolemma, down the T tubules, tells the periterminal cisternae to release calcium. Calcium binds to troponin, moves tropomyosin out of the way. These active sites, these tiny little dots here, are exposed on actin. Myosin head can bind, and then muscle contraction occurs. You should be able to go through that a couple of times. So these next 2 slides, as long as you know what calcium does, you're fine. This is just kind of a review. You don't have to worry about inactive binds 2, and then it binds another 2. You don't have to worry about that. Just know what calcium does. So now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of move on and talk about, well, what happens when that myosin head binds. Right, so we're going to go through the events of contraction. So the first thing that we have after calcium moves tropomyosin out of the way, cross bridge formation occurs. That myosin head will attach to the actin filament. It will then pivot. That myosin head pivots and pulls that actin filament towards that M line. That H zone is going to be getting smaller. So then in order for that head to detach, we need ATP. So actually, we need ATP for our muscles to relax, not to contract. And that's why, as an example, 2 examples, that's why cramps happen, right? The muscles will contract and there's not enough energy for it to relax. And also, once we die, rigor mortis sets in. All the muscles tense up because we don't have ATP to keep the calcium in the SR, and we don't have ATP to detach that myosin head. So ATP attaches to the myosin head, then that cross bridge detaches. So that ATP gets hydrolyzed, and then it'll cock that myosin head back into its high energy state so that it's ready to bind to actin once again. So we're going to go over this. There's an image on the next slide. So here this myosin head attaches, right? Calcium bound to troponin, moved tropomyosin out of the way. So cross bridge formation occurs. So then it's going to pivot, and this is going towards that H zone. And then in order for it to detach, it needs to bind to ATP. That ATP will be hydrolyzed to cock that head, to put it in its high energy conformation so it can bind again. And during contraction, that will happen several times. All right, kind of switching gears here, we have to talk about what a motor unit is. So a motor unit is just simply the motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it hits. And the number of muscle fibers per neuron can vary. And if we have fine movements, we're going to have smaller motor units. If we have large weight-bearing muscles, we're going to have large motor units. And I have an image on this next slide, and then that's going to be the end of this part. Right, so this motor unit is hitting V's, whereas this motor unit is hitting fewer. Okay, so the motor unit is just the neuron and all the muscle fibers it hits, and they can vary. And that's the end of this part.